to help you understand maybe some of the frustrations that we had that led us to where we are today. And that really was what motivated me to find restorative justice. It was my frustration of being a criminal defense attorney in a system that I quickly realized is not designed to meet the needs of the people that get forced into it. And I think most people get forced into the criminal legal system. You'll also notice that in my language, I tend not to say the criminal justice system, because I think justice is an elusive thing. I think we need to seek it on a case-by-case basis. And Monica learned on the second day of my class that we talk a lot about what justice requires, and we give a specific instance and say, in this case, what does justice require? And I think that's a good way for us to begin to think more broadly about what justice is. And one thing that I often say to my students and to others is that if we had a broad definition of the term justice, we wouldn't need the term restorative justice, because restoration would be a part of our definition of what justice is, and in a particular instance, what does justice require. So I wasn't seeing that in this field that I chose to enter into, and I chose this at a later age than most people. I was 36 years old when I went to law school. I had 3 little kids running around my house. I didn't do it the easy way, and people said, you must really understand exactly what you want to be as a lawyer, giving up a great job and moving your home and your family and all that. I said, I really don't. I feel led to it. The only thing I'm sure of is I'll never be a criminal defense attorney. And so, Joy, the first thing that I fell in love with in law school was criminal law and criminal defense, mainly because you got to make lists. I'm a list guy. Any list people in the room? So you can relate when you say, if I do something tomorrow at my house that's not on my list, what am I going to do? I'm going to write it on my list, and I'm going to cross it off. Criminal law is that way. We've got elements. It's defined in elements. And so that resonated with me. What also resonated with me was that I have always been a champion of the underdog. And believe me, the defendants are the underdogs in the system, because the state has all the resources and usually has all the facts, and we don't have any of the facts. But I also recognize in the courtroom every day there was a sea of pain sitting out there. And I sat on this side and I looked out at you, the people that got brought into the courtroom, and everybody in the space was hurting, whether you were a victim or whether you were an offender, and you didn't want to be there. And the court is not designed to meet those needs that you were hurting over. And so that was my frustration. And then one day I met a guy named Tony Baker, who was a brand new criminal law professor at Campbell. He had come from Pepperdine, he'd come from other places in the world too. And he knew about restorative justice. And over coffee, as I was meeting him and telling him about my frustration, and that I was a criminal defense attorney and I had just become certified as a civil superior court mediator, he said, you ever use mediation in your criminal practice? And I thought he was an idiot. Right? I said, well, I didn't tell him I thought he was an idiot. But I said, well, no, because I can't let my clients sit in a room and talk about what they've done. And he said, yeah, I understand that, but there are ways around that. Well, what I didn't understand at the time was if you can create a restorative justice program, you can have the local court adopt rules that protect the speech that's made within a mediation context. And that's part of what we do now. We were created mainly as a diversion program for the juvenile court in Harnett County, and then expanded into the other 2 counties where the law school sat, Harnett, Johnson, and Lee counties. And we received referrals from the juvenile court. I wasn't smart enough, but others that put this together were smart enough to invite people from the court system and from the law school, because the clinic was going to be seated in the law school, and we were going to be getting our referrals from the court system. So there was a lot of buy-in from day one, except we hadn't been proven. And so there was a lot of skepticism as well. We got 3 referrals in the first semester. And I said, uh-oh, this ain't gonna work. I mean, 3 referrals in the first semester. I probably had that many have come in since I left my house this morning. So it certainly has grown, but I was wondering if this was gonna work, because listen, back in 2003, the idea of bringing victims and offenders together was a foreign concept. And I've heard Val say many times, we have felt very alone in this work for a long time. That was part of the conversation that Val and I had the other day as we were talking about what we wanted to do to roll this out today, was that we have felt very alone for a long time, but we do not feel alone anymore. I mean, look, we've been invited to a conference to talk about this stuff, and it happens quite frequently. And there are people sitting in the room that do this work, and we've got entities across the state that we can call on to do this work. So it's very encouraging what has happened. We did the 3 cases, we had success. The next semester we got about 8, and before the end of the first 2-year grant cycle, we were so busy I couldn't keep up with it. I'll just try to briefly give you the scope of the work that we do, because Valerie and Val need to do the same thing with you that I'm doing, and then we do want to hear from you and answer your questions and hear what you have to say about this. We started as a juvenile diversion program where we use a victim-offender dialogue method. Meet with one party, meet with the other party. If they desire to do so, and if we think we can do it in a safe and productive way, we bring them together so that they can have a conversation about the harm that's been done, what they might want to be able to do together to address the harm. And to me, the most important piece is the humanizing piece. So help them understand who they are as human beings, and help them make that connection, that human connection. We just made a lot of connection a few minutes ago, right, when Valerie led us in that exercise. And I suggested yesterday that we ask the traffic ticket and the criminal thing. I can really relate to both of those. I mean, I don't have a severe criminal record, but I got one, and I had to do some explaining when I applied to law school and when I went to do my interview to take the bar exam. I know Joy did not experience this because she's never done anything wrong in her life. She's an angel, but I had some explaining to do. And the reason that I thought that would be a good question is because I did learn early on in my learning about restorative justice. At some level, we all are offenders. At some level, we all are victims. And that takes me to what I hear Val Hansen say all the time, and I'm stealing her thunder because she probably will say this today. Them is an illusion. There is only us. And she has taught me a lot through her attitude through all of this, and I really appreciate that. As a matter of fact, I read that quote in an interview that somebody did with her, and it was printed, and I was reading it, and that was her final quote. At least that was the final thing they put in the article. They probably didn't say half of what you said, and they probably misquoted a lot of what you said. But they didn't misquote that, because I've heard her say that so often. And I sent her a text, and I said, this is amazing, I'm proud of you. And if you have a gravestone, which I don't think she's going to have, I'm not going to have one, because I don't want anybody to have to maintain me in any way, either today or after I'm gone. But I said, if you have one, I think that should be on it. And I just love that. And I do think that's a lot about what restorative justice is all about, and that's the human connection that we're trying to make. So we started in the juvenile court. We expanded into the school system because the schools were sending most of the cases into the court. They were being sent to us. This was back in the day. It was zero tolerance, and this was before we even had the term school to prison pipeline. But I'm here to tell you it's real. And I know it's real because we don't just work in the school system and in the juvenile system, but we work on the far end of the spectrum too, in the prison system. And I may be in a school in the morning, and I may be in a prison in the afternoon. The stories that I'm hearing are the same stories. So there's definitely a connection. So do we need to be working on the kid end? You better believe it. Because what we don't want to do is have to work on the other end. Do we need to be working on the other end? You better believe it. Because 95% or so of our incarcerated are going to be released into the community. And I'm not convinced that we're doing the greatest job in the world of rehabilitation while they're in prisons. We're doing a better job. And I know that to be true because we're involved in that. And you're going to hear later today from Tim Moose from the department, who I just admire greatly and owe him a lot because he's invited us, he's re-invited us back into a lot of these spaces in the criminal correction system. And do we need to be working in the in-between? Absolutely we do. We don't just need to be working in systems, but we need to be working in communities. And you're going to hear a lot about that from both of these professionals that are going to be talking to you today. So we work across the spectrum. One place that we're working, that we just started with this year is something I'm very glad to be involved in. There's a new school in Wake County called Wake Monarch Academy, and it's for high schoolers who are struggling with substance abuse, and they have not been able to be successful in the traditional environment because the traditional environment is largely punitive when you do something wrong, and so they've not been able to survive. And historically, places for them to go are few and far between. And so Leah Wright, who directs that school, went through this with her son and realized there was nowhere to go, and so she created a place to go. And she did not want a punitive school like she was used to, and she actually worked in the school system for 30 years, and so she was well acquainted with it. And so she's invited us in to go to work with them, and so I'm just very glad to be a part of that as well. So pretty broad spectrum of the work that we get to do. And I heard that term over the holiday. There was an inspirational speaker that I heard, and he said, change your language. Don't think about things that you have to do. Think about things that you get to do. And I'm one of the fortunate ones that I get to do things that I love every day. And being here, Jeremy, is one of those things, and I'm just very grateful.
The practices that we are developing with it are borrowed very heavily from indigenous practices. And indigenous practices here in North America and also from indigenous groups across the world have given a lot to this movement. And so it's just really important that as a movement that we are recognizing the gift that they've given and trying to realize, like, how do we honor this gift that has been given to us? How do we take the practices and the wisdom that they've shared, while also within this framework of restorative justice, recognizing, like, we talk about harm all the time, and we really need to recognize that we have also, historically have contributed. There's a lot of harm that has happened to these indigenous nations. We have our own histories here in North America about how that came out, and then, but there's also things across the world with that as well. And so just kind of like grappling with how we are benefiting from the harm that happened historically, even today, that continues to benefit us. And now you're using practices and gleaning from their wisdom. And I don't have like a nice answer. I can't wrap this up in a bow. I'm just kind of sharing that, like, part of our journey with it is trying to acknowledge this and raising awareness about this. And then learning about how we can then support our indigenous neighbors in their struggles as well through this. And so, like I said, I don't have a tidy bow for it, but it's just acknowledging it when we are talking about restorative justice. So for me personally, I got into restorative justice. Well, I guess I've always had a very personal and spiritual passion for peace. It's always kind of been something I've wanted, and as you know, when I was younger, it was very idealistic. Like, why can't we all just get along, right? Like, if it could just be that simple. But yeah, as I grew older and got more involved in life and realized, like, that is not enough. That having that hope for stuff is not really enough to make that happen. And so I knew I needed to get more understanding, get more knowledge, develop some skills for what that was. And that's how I ended up in the Peace and Conflict Studies program here at UNCG, was trying to pursue that way, kind of to get the skills I needed in order to do this work. And as a student, I took a course on restorative justice, and it did kind of just transform my whole perspective on things. I think I've always struggled with a lot of the problems we see with our criminal justice system, or what do we call it, just criminal system if we're not using justice?
Well, I just say legal system.
Okay. With our legal system, there's just so much disparity between how people are treated in the system, how sentences are given out. We see just so much disparity, especially with racial disparity, but and economic disparity. How there's such a difference between, like, white collar crime and blue collar crime. And I was also starting to notice at that time, recognizing, like, how students are getting arrested and going to juvenile court for things that when I was in school was not something that was happening. And so, and those things were really bothering me. Also, just like the percentage, like how America's prison population is, like, astronomical compared to so many other countries in the world. So a lot of these things were bothering me. And trying to figure out like, well, what can we do about it? And so when I learned about restorative justice, I saw that this was a place that really kind of developed the vision that I had for how I feel like we should be with each other, like connecting, relationship based, focusing on making sure everyone has basic respect and dignity in what we're doing, and focusing on, giving people a chance to, make a, second chance kind of thing, like give people a chance to build a different life instead of always kind of keeping this label on them that even after they've served their sentence continues to follow them throughout life. And so with restorative justice, I kind of saw a vision for something different and really liked that, really appreciated the values that were there. And then I really also appreciated that with restorative justice, there were practical things we do to help develop that. So there's practices that come with it. And that was really important to me to kind of see like, okay, it has the hope that I'm looking for, and it has a practical way to get there. And then also, a lot of times we talk about restorative justice, we're thinking of that interpersonal conflict between people. And what I liked about the restorative justice framework is that I could take that framework and then kind of apply it to some of these bigger societal conflicts as well. So it's not just about interpersonal conflict. You can take the same framework and look at the societal conflicts and thinking about what is the harm that is happening within our organizations, what is the harm that's happening within the systems, and how different communities are impacted differently. And so that's kind of where it led me to restorative justice. And when I was in graduate school, I did the same thing. I had 3 kids in graduate school. I got a 4th kid as a graduation present. That was a surprise. So it was busy, and I really wasn't in a place where I could move and go where they're doing restorative justice. So I'm kind of like, well, where are they doing restorative justice here? What can I do locally? And this was like 8 years ago. If you do a Google search for restorative justice in North Carolina, like there wasn't much coming up at all. I think eventually I found, the first thing I ever found was John's program at Campbell Law School. So that was the first thing I was able to find. And so like we talked about kind of feeling lonely at that part, but I was determined that this is what I wanted to do, or this is what I needed to do. This is what I get to do. Because I had that, I was in a space in life where I could work on that. And so just started talking with some other people in my community about it. Some of them had heard about restorative justice, a lot through more religious communities is where people had started talking about it, and some prison fellowship kind of connections there. But we just kind of met with some people and got a group together, and we decided to form Triad Restorative Justice. So that's kind of how that got started. And as we were building some things, I did connect with John, and was also like when I met with him, a board member and I went out to meet with him about 6 years ago to learn about what they were doing. And after that meeting on the drive back, my board member and I were just talking about how amazing it was to be part of a movement that was just so generous and giving. So like here I am meeting with someone, and it's kind of like, welcome to the community, and like here's all of these resources. Like he just gave me everything he was doing. Instead of kind of, a lot of times people try to be protective about their stuff and you're not sure really what they want to share or not. And so it's just great to be part of a movement that had that open connection where the values that we were wanting to see in the justice world are really just the values that we're living out with the people that we're around all the time. That we live out those values. You can't just keep it in a nice box. It takes over your life in a sense. And so we really appreciated that kind of connection that we had. And when we first got started, we also kind of got started in the juvenile justice world, and finding programs, kind of figuring out where can we get a foothold in our community. And juvenile justice was where we started our, we have an anger management class that we do with youth, and then we were able to use that relationship building to then develop a restorative justice program, which has been running for about 2 years. And if you know what the past 2 years have been like, you know that our restorative justice program looks very unique in that it has been run mostly virtually online, lots of phone calls and Zoom kind of things. So, but we made it happen though. We have a great coordinator. I'm hoping she'll be here later today. So I would encourage you, if you want to talk to Amanda when she gets here, please do talk to her about what the work she's doing with that. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about where we are. We also work with the schools in our community. With the schools, we're really focusing on that whole like community part thing. It's like we have to build the foundation of the relationships first before getting to the conflict piece. And so that's a lot of the work we're trying to do is build that foundation with the schools and helping them to build that foundation with their students and making that shift from the punitive to restorative, because it's really hard to do because we're so used to the other way of doing things. So that's a lot of our advocacy and educational work that we do.
I will echo the loneliness I have felt until fairly recently in the last few years in this movement of knowing that there are folks out there and there's pockets everywhere, but being able to connect was really challenging. And now we see it now. Literally, we are sitting in a room, right, with folks who are all interested in this movement, and that we get to work together and make these connections. So that is just absolutely amazing, the work we get to do, the work we love to do. I guess I'll just maybe add personally, kind of my why. I did, like John, go back to law school in my 30s, knowing that there was something I was feeling a pull to, not being quite able to define it, but knowing I had a strong interest in civil rights and racial justice, and thinking that that would be a good place to pursue that path. Also, I got disillusioned pretty quickly. It took me about a year of law school to be like, I'm not sure this is the ticket for me. But I was really lucky. I went to NC Central, and they had an ADR program, so an alternative dispute resolution program, and I got to take every single class in it. Mediation and arbitration and negotiation and mediation advocacy, and lawyer as a problem solver, and lawyer as a peacemaker. I mean, these fantastic classes. The one class they didn't have, though, name it? Restorative justice. They didn't have restorative justice, but I met John Powell in law school, and he has been a mentor ever since. I used to say I followed him around like a puppy dog. I told him I wouldn't say that anymore. But he is, like Valerie was saying, just this has been such an amazing community of people who, and it started with John, in my opinion, who have just been willing to share everything that they know and every resource that they have. And we've created this amazing, I'm looking out here at Monica and Joy, Maggie and Jennifer, who I've worked with. We've created this amazing community. Oh, Francis, there you're back there behind Monica. This amazing community of folks. And looking at Michael, we've done work, and Jeremy. This is, it's a beautiful, beautiful coming together of people with, I think, some common soul values and we're finding a way to proceed with that in the world. The things that matter. So personally, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. My family is a survivor. All of my entire family and my 7 siblings were survivors of attempted murder. And the justice system really, really failed my family, the legal system. There was no justice. My family was amazing, and they kind of took it into their own. My mom ended up adopting the child who tried to burn our house down. That's the shortest version I could possibly give you, but there's a couple of decades worth of history and story in there. And so I was raised in a household where you try to figure out how to take care of each other. And so I think when I look at restorative justice, it is how do we take care of each other in the place where we are at? How are we in relationship with one another? And then when I look at systems work, which is what we're talking about, which is what a lot of us are interested in transforming, and we think about transformative justice, which is changing the systems that are impacting every single person, right? And disproportionately impacting so many folks. I look at restorative justice as that way to get to transformative justice. So it's the relationships, it's building the relationships, it's the networking, it's the community of how we make this network so that we can transform the system. And I think, I'm sure I'm not the only one in here who can say that, we really know that folks who have been harmed cause harm, right? And so what do we do? How do we support one another in discontinuing the cycle of harm? And I think that's what we're all here to talk about today. John, you said my word, you said my phrase.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. It feels good to hear you say it. But this idea that, what affects one of us affects all of us. And I think it really is an illusion to think that, whatever's happening to them out there is not impacting me, and whatever's impacting me is not affecting out there. And so how do we I want to say how do we build the connections, but I think a lot of my personal evolution in this work is realizing not really how we're building the connections, but how are we revealing the connections? What are the processes and the tools to reveal the connections that are already there? How can we get to the space where we are recognizing on a daily basis and in our work and in our systems how we are impacting one another? And so, I've been able to really be a part of this work for a good decade now, which has been amazing. At DSC and through our collaborative partners, we do student mediations in a couple of different school districts. We do mediations in district court. We now have a restorative justice program in our district and superior court. We hold community listening circles. That's been a dream for a couple of years, and as you said, we all know what's happened the last couple of years. And so we've just started doing those, which has been exciting. And we do quite a bit of work in the community, basically with the philosophical approach. If someone asks for a restorative process, we have an obligation to help them meet that need. And so that's really our approach whenever we can. And then we also we have a collaboration where we work with John in Central Prison. And so John didn't mention it, but there's been one circle at a time, and John started this years ago, working on death row in Central Prison in Raleigh, doing victim impact circles for a series of about 3 months. And then I started working with John in Butner Federal Prison doing these circles, not on death row, but with the general population, a lot of the guys who are going to be coming out of prison. And then John was invited back in, and we've got a team now that is going to be doing 3 different circles in Central Prison starting next week. We got a late start because of COVID, but we're doing John and Joy will be doing a general population circle. Monica and Joya will be doing a circle for folks who have not done a circle yet on death row. Again, these are all about 3 months. We'll meet once a week. And then my friend and colleague Shai Tamari and I will be doing a graduate circle on death row, which is basically going to be guys who have already participated in either John or our death row circle last year. Will be coming back, and they'll be learning how to keep circle. So I was sitting at the dinner table last night, and as I said, I had 3 kids, and my daughter was sitting there, my husband. It was just the 3 of us last night. And I told them that I was going to be coming to talk to a bunch of awesome people tomorrow. And I said, is there like something that I've like shared with you all that you think folks might want to hear about? Is there like a story that I've told you? And immediately, my daughter Meg, she's 15 years old, she said, tell them about the chickens. I said, tell me more. And she said, the guy on death row that had the chickens. I said, okay. So here's a story about chickens and death row. So we were in circle last semester, and it was my turn to bring a talking piece. And so I'm sure a lot of you know, probably a lot of you have sat in circle. When you sit in circle, you pass a talking piece, and that's kind of how you regulate the conversation. And that's what we do every week on death row. We always have a talking piece, and people bring different. Each week, someone brings a different talking piece. And so it was my turn to bring the talking piece this week and explain the significance of it. And, you know, I have a few different ones that I use, but I just didn't know what to bring. And also you're coming into prison, so you're never exactly sure what they're gonna allow you to bring or not bring. And so just a couple of days before that, we raise hens. My daughter pretty much does. And she's got some social anxiety. She's much more comfortable with animals than people. And she even has, somebody gave her a T-shirt that said "Hens before men's," which I always think is fantastic. And yeah, so anyway, so there had been a stray dog in the neighborhood, and it attacked and killed one of our chickens. And this was the most beautiful, beautiful chicken. And it was a really hard time, but it was also a lesson on life and death, and you love and things pass, and that's part of life. But it was really challenging. But so there was just a pile of feathers, so we had known that she had been killed. And we saved one feather, and we just kind of put it on the mantle. And so I'm walking, trying to figure out what am I going to use as a talking piece, and I see this feather, and it had just been a couple of days. I was like, okay, that's the one. And so I bring this into the prison, and I share the story about what had happened and how it had impacted our family and my daughter. And it goes around, and it gets to JJ. JJ looks at it, you know, he looks at it and he said, "That's a buff Orpington, right?" And I said, "Yes, that's a buff Orpington." He said, "We had those growing up too." And he goes on to talk about a little bit more about what he had growing up and a little bit of his life. And we're learning all about each other, right? As we sit in circle, and we're full participants in the circle. And I went home, and I told Meg about it that evening. And she just looked at me, and she was like, "He had chickens too, and he knew it was a buff Orpington?" I was like, yeah. She was like, "That's so cool." And so last night when I said, you know, what story would you want to hear? And she told me that. We talked about it a little bit, and I said, "Why do you think that's a story that other people would want to hear about?" And she said, "We're connected even though I've never met him." And it's like, okay. And she said, "Mama, we're all just people, and we're all just doing people things."
Yeah.
So that's what when we sit here, we're talking about like the interconnection, right? And like, why do we do this work and why it's important? We have no idea. We may have like a vision right out here, and we can sense it and we can feel it. But that literally meant, like she took that. Somebody that's on death row, that is learning how to die on death row, learning how to live knowing that you're going to die there. And in relation to, a 15-year-old kiddo with social anxiety, but it was important to her that he knew this was a buff Orpington. All right.